As we did in the previous lecture, I just wanted to give us another opportunity to go through some practice problems. So again, the format's going to be the same. On the next slide and on the following slides after that, you'll have practice problems, and then once you're ready, go ahead and click the space bar or push the presentation to the slide afterwards, and then I'll give you an explanation as to how the sentences should be formulated. I want to keep going with our pattern or our process that we've been using to do these formalizations. A lot of the things that we do in logic are just sort of process oriented. If you can just understand what the process is, everything else usually follows from it. So let's just go ahead and do the same thing as before. So we're going to find our letters from our dictionary that's up here. In our sentences, so we have if the pirates plunder, then they sail and bury the treasure. So we have P, S, and T. Now we'll go back through and look for our operators. We have an if then. We have an and that looks like it. So we have an if then. If thens are arrows. Then we have a and, which is an ampersand. And then we just need to determine where our parentheses go, and looking at the problem, we see another comma. We see if the pirates plunder, then they sail and bury the treasure. So this is actually going to be one of the instances in which we could write it one of two ways. We could put the parentheses here if you think that this is all one thing, and then and bury the treasure is tagged on at the end, or if you think this is all one thing, then you can change where you put the parentheses and you can put them here. I think following the comma rule is usually the most helpful one. Here, there isn't a clear indication as to where the parentheses would go. More than likely, it would probably be better to write it the other way. Now, looking at it, because if we had a both, that they both sail and bury the treasure, then it would make more sense to write it the other way, because the both is saying that those are a package deal. So if there was the both in there, we would probably say that. But without the both, we could probably write it either way. We could write it this way or the other way. But the idea is just to get a little bit of practice. If you were to write it either way on the exam, I probably would give you credit for it. Also, the ones on the exam will be pretty clear cut, so you don't have to worry too much about whether or not there's this ambivalence between one way or the other. But just to give you an idea of the different ways in which we can symbolize something. So let's look at the second one. Same thing as before. We see raid, we see sail, we see plunder, we see buried treasure. So we see all four of them. So we're going to put the R, S, P, T. We'll go back through. We have an either or, so we know those two go together. We have an and, we have an and. So looking through, we'll ignore the either for right now. The pirates raid and sail, or they plunder and bury treasure. If you remember from the previous lecture, the either is going to signify that this is one side of the disjunct and this is the other side of the disjunct. So when we go back through to put our parentheses in, just put them over those. So either is going to recognize the left side of the disjunct, right side is going to recognize the right side of the disjunct, or I should say the or. And just so we're clear, these things, the things that are on the other side of a wedge, are called disjuncts because the operator itself is a disjunction. So whenever you hear me use the word disjunct, that's just a fancy way of saying what's on one side of the wedge. Let's look at the third one. So the third one, we have sail, we have buried treasure, so we have just S and T. Now we'll go back through, we see but, And we also see do not. So but is an ampersand. Do not is a tilde. And since we're looking at it, we've only got 2 letters, so we don't actually need any parentheses here. That's all we got to do. So pretty simple ones to begin with. Uh, and so go ahead and move on to the next set of problems, and then when you're ready, move on to the solution part. Again, let's just go ahead and follow the process that we've been doing. So let's look for the letters that we'll need. In the first one, we have plunder, we have sale, we have buried treasure. So we got P, S, and T. Looking at the operators we need, we have an if and only if, we have a but, and we also have a don't. So if and only if is going to be our double arrow. We have a but, and we have a don't. So now we do need parentheses. Let's look at what we've got and see if we can determine where our parentheses go. So the pirates plunder if and only if they sail but don't bury the treasure. Um, in this instance, it seems like the but don't is giving us an indication that those two things go together. On one hand, they sail, but don't bury the treasure. So I think the most appropriate way to symbolize it would be putting the parentheses around those two and leaving it like that. Without the comma, sometimes we have to use our intuition and read the sentence and try to understand what we think the meaning is that's being conveyed here. So if we read that second half of the if and only if the biconditional, we have they sail but don't bury the treasure. And it seems like those two are being merged together. Let's look at the second one. Second one is pirate sail and raid. So there's only 2. Sailing and raiding. We have, and it is not the case, and we have an and. So before, as I told you, we needed a tilde and then tilde everything that follows it is not the case. So that's what we have here. And then we also have an ampersand. So that's how we do that one. Let's look at the third one. We have bury the treasure. We have sail or raid. So we have T, S, R. Then we have an if then. And we have a it's not the case. And then we have an or. So we have the T here. So we have if the pirates bury the treasure, then it is not the case. I'm going to give myself a little bit than what I just did there. It is not the case. Remember that whenever we see it, it's not the case. It's everything that follows that is going to be put in parentheses and a tilde in front of it. So it is not the case that S or R. And so that's how we'll symbolize that one. The parentheses are told or given to us by that phrase there. It is not the case. So again, not too difficult, but a good review. So go ahead and move on to the next set, and then when you're ready, move on to the solutions. So let's begin by following our process, and let's look for the different letters we need in this first sentence. We have sail, we have raid, we have plunder. So we have S, R, P. Let's go back through. We have don't, but, then and. So we know that we have a don't in front of the S. We have a but, which is going to tell us it's an ampersand. Then we've got another ampersand here because we've got an and. So now we still need our sets of parentheses. In this instance, we do have a comma that's going to tell us where parentheses go. So we know that everything on left side of the comma goes together, and then everything on the right side of the comma goes together. And since we have these two, that's all we need. Pretty easy. So let's move on to the second one. So we have sale, we have plunder, we have buried treasure. So we've got SPT. We have an either or that'll go together. We have an ampersand there. And that looks like it. So we have an or and an and. Now, this one's written a little bit cryptically, but I think we have a pretty clear understanding as to where the parentheses go, because if you remember, whenever you have an either or, it's like saying that this side goes all together, this side all goes together. So we would probably write it like this. So either the pirates sail or the pirates plunder and bury treasure. So the either or, the either signifying the left side of the wedge, and then the or signifying the right side. Uh, and so that seems to be like the best way for us to symbolize it in that instance. Now, let's look at the third one. Same thing as before, raid, sail, plunder, bury treasure. So we have all four. Oops. So we have an R, S, P, T. Now we have a both and. We have an if and only if. We have another and. So pirates raid and sail if and only if they plunder and bury treasure. Now, if you remember, I told you that both and usually signify that the things go together as one unit. That's what these are doing here. So we know that one set of our parentheses will go here. Let's look at the rest of the sentence. Sorry, this should probably read the pirates both raid and sail, not the both pirates raid and sail. So the pirates both raid and sail if and only if pirates plunder and bury treasure. So this seems to indicate to me that our other set of parentheses would go there, mainly because if and only if is typically, when it's read like that, it's the main operator, which we'll get into that in once we start the truth trees. But there is a case to be made that you could also write it like this. If you wanted to say that this if and only if is capturing only this part, and then that this is a third addition onto the statement. So you could say R and S, double arrow P, and T with our parentheses like that. That's probably another variation that you could do. Given how this sentence is written, it seems like it's open-ended to either way. Writing it the way that I just showed you or writing it this way, either one would seem pretty much correct in this instance because it's a little ambiguous. Maybe if we were to write it the way I have it right now, we would expect to see a both right here in the sentence, and we don't have that. So since we don't have the both, maybe it would be better to write it like this. But I could understand writing it either way. Again, sometimes this is a little bit subjective. But the important thing is making sure that you recognize the propositions that you need to include, you're recognizing the main operators that you need, and you're recognizing how to write well-formed formulas using the parentheses. That's what I'm going to be looking for. So go ahead and move on to the next set of problems, and then when you're ready, move on to the solutions. Again, let's just go ahead and follow our process that we've been doing, looking for our letters first. So we have neither sail nor bury treasure. So we know we have an S and a T. The pirates neither nor. So if you remember from last time, neither nor is the negated versions or the negated terms used in place of either or. So what's implied is it's not this side or it's not this side. So that's how we can write neither nor. It's not this or it's not this. Another way of writing this is writing it with an ampersand like that. Those are actually equivalent sentences. What it's saying is it's not both of these things. Uh, the other instance is saying it's not this or it's not this, and what this is saying is it can't be both of them, which is equivalent in logic. I don't care which way you write it. To me, it makes more sense to write the not S or not T, just following the rules that I've been telling you. But if I see that you use tilde and then parentheses S and T, that's also correct too. But I just wanted to point that out to you here in this example. So let's go ahead and do the next one. Sail, sail, and buried treasure. So we've got another S and T. We have don't. We have another don't, and we have an and. So we have a don't, we have an and, we have another tilde there. And so in this instance, we have not and not. And so if we wanted to, actually, that should be that's probably the best way to render it. I don't want to get too far into other variations of it, but that is probably the better way to write it. You could also write it. Let's see if I can get myself enough room. Do it to the left of it. You could write it like this. So what that's saying is it's not S or T. And here in the sentence that we have the not S and not T, this version here, I think is better given what the sentence is saying. When we read that, we're seeing a negation, our proposition, and negation, proposition. If you want to be more creative with it, you can be more creative with it. But again, just as an intro level, we're just doing these translations as sort of practice for seeing how real life conversation can be put into a propositional logic. I think it's just easy to sort of follow the sentences the way we've been doing and formalize them. If you want to be more clever about how you're rendering them, that's fine too. But for me, I just had always thought that writing them the most basic way is the easiest thing to do. So let's do the third one. So we have don't sail, we have raid and plunder. So sail, raid, plunder. We have don't, we have an if then. We have another and. So we have a don't that's in front of the S, we have an if then, and then we have an and. So let's read back through and see where our parentheses go. If the pirates don't sail, then the pirates raid and plunder. Here, I think the comma would indicate that we do it this way. Most if-then statements always have the comma anyway, but I just think that the way in which we read it naturally, saying that if the pirates don't sail, then the pirates raid and plunder, that those two are going together. Of course, the way I have it, and just keeping consistent with what I've told you before, we might expect that there should have been a both here, that the pirates both raid and plunder, which would suggest that the two things go together. But we could also write it this way. They're different logically, but the sentence itself seems to afford that is a possibility that we could write it like that, since we don't have the both and. So we would be treating this as one sentence and this as a tag on at the very end, written that way. Again, maybe if we were trying to formalize it in the other way, if we were thinking that the parentheses went in the other direction, or across, or if they went around the R and P, then we would probably expect that there was a both that is missing somewhere in here. But again, either way would probably be all right with translating the sentence. I'm not too terribly worried about it, but just to give you an idea of the different variations that you could work in on these different sentences. So go ahead and do the last set, and then we'll cover them, and then we will be done with translations. Again, let's just follow the process that we've been doing for each of these translations. So we'll start by identifying what the propositions are that we need. We have plunder, we have sail, we have bury the treasure. So we've got a PST. We have, and it is not the case, we have an if then. We have an and that looks like it. So remember, it is not the case. It's telling us that everything after it is going to get negated and needs to go inside parentheses. So then we have an if then. We have the pirates plunder. Then they sail, and then we have an and going there. So I'm just going to try and stay consistent with what I've told you on other slides, because we still need another set of parentheses. And since I don't see a both here, there's not a both. So since there's not a both, it seems like this would be the place that we need to put the parentheses around here. Mainly because it's saying if the pirates plunder, then they sail, and bury the treasure. But again, I can understand why you would think to write it this way. Instead, because they sail and bury the treasure. Actually, we're missing the subject there in the second one, so maybe if it was written the other way, we would expect that then they sail and the pirates bury the treasure. Either one in this case, again, I will totally understand if you formalize it in that way. Really, what I'm going to be looking for is that you recognize how to use the parentheses. You recognize what each of the operators, how each of the operators are indicated by the keywords as you see, and then also whether or not you have the right propositions and putting them in right order. So either one would work in that instance, and most times I'm not going to be too picky as long as it looks like you have done it in some way that makes reasonable sense. So let's move on to the second one. Pirate sail, raid, plunder. We have an either or, we have an if then, and that looks like it. So sail, raid, plunder. Then we have an either or, and then we have an if then. So in this instance, it seems like our either or is going to be telling us that we have the either side that's on the left and we have the or side that's on the right. So that would indicate to us that we need to put our parentheses there, and that should be everything that we would need for that instance. So the either or trumps the fact that there's a comma. Remember that if then statements, all conditional statements typically have a comma after the if part or the conditional part of the clause. So in this instance, the either or is telling us that whatever associated with the either is on the left side, whatever is associated with the or is on the right side. We also do have a comma here that indicates that the parentheses would probably more than likely go around the R arrow P. So let's do this final one. We have raid, we have sail, bury treasure. So we have R, S, T, we have a don't, we have a but, we have a either or. That looks like it. So the don't is going to say that we need a tilde. A but is going to say that we need an ampersand. And then we have an either or, which is to say that we need one there or a wedge there. Now we need a place to put our commas. So the pirates don't raid, but the pirates do either sail or bury treasure. So either or, that seems to be indicating in this instance that those two go together. So these are all part of one sentence. I would imagine that the best way to render this would be like so. Again, the subject pirates is being carried in both of those parts of the statement. The pirates either sail or bury treasure. Uh, so it seems like they would probably both go together. In this instance, I know I've told you here that the either or is telling you where the parentheses go. In this one, it does too, because it's saying that that's part of one whole statement. It's saying that this is one whole statement, either this or this, and they seem like they should be going together. And then this, the pirates don't raid, but is seeming like a attachment to that either or clause. So those are, again, the way in which we can translate things. What I'm going to be looking for on the exam is pretty much if you can follow this process. Some of the symbolizations can be different. I understand that. That's what I flagged in a bunch of these different instances. But what I'm looking for is one, do you write things in a well-formed formula? That means make sure you have the right number of parentheses, make sure that you don't have floating operators, and that you have things written on both sides. Uh, Also, I'm looking for the right use of operators. Just gonna put the different ones in here. So for ampersand, you have and or but. If you have a wedge, you have either or just or. An arrow, you're going to have an if then, sometimes maybe just an if, and then a comma later, and the then is implied. The tilde is going to be not, or no, or never, or it's not the case. So anything that's negating something, neither nor is also in there. So any sort of negation is going to be symbolized with the tilde. And then if and only if is where we'll see the biconditional. There's other key terms that can signify that a biconditional is being in the sentence. But I will always just use if and only if because biconditionals are a little bit weird, I think. They're probably my least favorite in the course to teach. But I'll get to that once we get a little bit further along. But that's really what I'm going to be interested in seeing when you do your exams is whether or not you can write things in a well-formed formula. You're using parentheses correctly. You aren't having free-floating operators. You are recognizing how to make separations in the sentences, even if they aren't the exact ones I would think of. There is more than likely a chance I would give you a good bit of credit, if not full credit, on them. And then the other thing is I just want to make sure that you understand what the different terms mean in the sentences, how these operators get used. So if you feel comfortable with that, that would be great. Translations aren't bad once you figure out the process like I was showing you, looking for the propositions you'll need and then symbolizing them, and then, or sorry, marking out the propositions you need, going back through, looking for the operators you need, and then finally looking back through and determining where you need to put the parentheses. All the questions on your exam will follow this same sort of pattern. I'm pretty sure I even use the same dictionary on the exam, so everything should be rather familiar to you once the time comes that we do the first exam. But if you do need more practice problems, always feel free to shoot me an email if you want to go over this stuff. We can always talk about it in a office hour, or if I can do it through email, I can do it through email too if you would prefer that. But just let me know. But once we start the next lecture will be on truth trees, which will be something uh, new and interesting, and will be the first part of natural deduction that we do for this course.